Hi there, I'm Dr. Teresa Caraway, CEO of Hearing First, and welcome to our Facebook Live Ask Me Anything event. And we happen to be broadcasting live from Boston, Massachusetts, where it just happens that the American Speech and Hearing Association convention is taking place this week with over 19,000 speech-language pathologists and audiologists coming together to learn to grow. And I'm excited because at Hearing First, we believe that every family needs to know the status of their baby's hearing first, because all child development hinges on that. And we do that through raising awareness of the importance of newborn hearing screening, the awareness that children today who are born deaf can learn to listen and talk, and we provide educational opportunities as well as 2 online communities, a parent-to-parent support group as well as a professional learning community. So welcome, but I'm really excited because I feel like I'm sitting here with listening and spoken language royalty. And these people that are joining me tonight, Drs. Stacey Lim, Dr. Don Goldberg, and Dr. Carol Flexer, are my heroes in the field and have taught me so much, and I'm excited to continue our conversation this evening. So thank you guys for being here and braving the cold weather that we're having right now. But I want to invite you as an audience to submit your questions by posting them in the comments section below. And we look forward to answering your questions today. So don't hesitate to send them our way. But to get us started, these 3 people have the most fascinating connection of how their lives intersected. And I think that's what I love about listening and spoken language, that you meet the nicest of people who along the way become your great friends and colleagues. So tell us a little bit about how your paths crossed and how you first got to know each other.
I'll start. I was born with profound hearing loss, and my parents suspected I had hearing loss maybe when I was 6 weeks old. And they had my hearing tested by different people, but they wanted to have a second opinion. So they went to Kent State University to have my hearing tested by a faculty member who, for whatever reason, was not there. But in his place was Carl. So Carl tested my hearing and confirmed that I did have a pretty significant hearing loss. And my parents were very upset, obviously, and Carol was very reassuring in that she told them about listening spoken language. She told them about the Listen Foundation in Colorado. And by coincidence, my dad had a business trip to Denver. So he called information directory assistants to find out more about this clinic. And this person knew exactly what he was talking about. So my dad went out there and was ready to move to Colorado. And but the main product told my dad that, they should go to Pennsylvania first and go to the BB Center first. And so my parents brought me, as well as Carol and my speech pathologist, to the BB Center, and they stayed for a week. And of course, I don't remember any of that.
Yeah, so you were really little. So, okay, so Carol, I have a question. As you were a doctoral student, so tell us about when you first met Stacey and what that was like, and testing your hearing, and what you remember about that.
So what I remember is that her parents wanted to have an unbiased second or even third opinion, because I think they had taken you to several different places. So your mother said, well, we haven't had her hearing tested before, but we think there may or may not be a problem, because she didn't want me to go in thinking that they already had an answer. Mm-hmm. And your mother was hoping maybe that wasn't the answer. This was many, many years ago, of course. So we did behavioral testing in the sound room, and we confirmed that, yes, you did indeed have a profound hearing loss. And your parents were very upset about that, because their previous information didn't leave them with what they felt was a lot of hope and possibilities for your future. And I advised them, and my master's degree was from the University of Denver, even though I was getting my PhD at Kent State. And when I was in the University of Denver, I did an externship with Doreen Pollack at Porter Memorial Hospital. So I knew all about, it was called Orthopedic approach at that time, but then became auditory-verbal, listening and spoken language. But I knew all about that and how wonderful it could be. And that was the first time your parents had heard that there were other possibilities. And as you said, your father then literally had an opportunity to meet Doreen literally the next week. And then Doreen advised you all about going to a closer listening and spoken language center, which was the Helen Beebe Center in Easton, Pennsylvania. And then that brings in...
Well, I was a fairly young professional working at the Beebe Center, and I'd gone to college in that town and was working with a little one, a little older than you, and I was unaware that Stacey's parents were behind the two-way mirror watching, and what your dad has since told me was he watched and he said, well, if Ben can learn to listen and speak, Stacey is going to learn to listen and develop spoken language as well. And they went back to Ohio with their marching orders, continued to work with local folks, Ginny and Carol, and essentially would come back on visits to the Beebe Center. And I really did not know personally that they were ever behind the window, but later we became connected. And weirdly enough, our history includes a trip to the Philippines when you were a teenager. And next thing I know, she's about to go to college and thinks about coming to the College of Worcester, where I was a professor.
Ah, so when you started out with hearing aids, you start out with body aids. You're a product of technology, really, right?
Yeah.
Hearing aids, then behind the ear, and then tell us about cochlear implant.
Yeah, I got my first hearing aid when I was 11 years old. So I wore hearing aids all my life. And when I turned 18, I got my cochlear implant maybe a month or a couple months before I went to college, so like a week after my 18th birthday. And I still wear a hearing aid on the unimplanted ear. So I've been wearing that the rest of that time.
Yeah. So currently you wear one cochlear implant and one hearing aid. You go off to college and your path crosses again with Dawn. But what did you decide you wanted to be when you grew up?
Well, I wanted to be an audiologist, and it all goes back to that trip that Don and I were in the Philippines, because one of the speakers that children were born to family deaf would never learn to speak. And I thought to myself, that's not true.
Here I am.
Yeah. So that kind of got me started down that path.
Okay. So since then, you have an AUD and a PhD in speech in audiology, and currently you're a professor, an assistant professor.
Yes. I teach audiology to graduate student at Central Michigan University right now.
So it's kind of coming full circle, and here's what happens. Then you guys decide, the three of you, to author a study and to conduct a study on auditory-verbal approach and listening and spoken language outcomes. And so I think it's kind of interesting that the person that you now have a colleague that is that you met way on early on as a little one, that you're now doing some fantastic work with. So what was your motivation to conduct an outcome study in the first place?
Well, for the very first article we did, Carol and I were very involved with Auditory-Verbal International, and to our understanding, no one really had done any research about this fairly unknown option for kids. And we elected to do a survey research, and we primarily had subjects, through their clinicians in both Canada and the United States, report to us various information about their degree of hearing loss, their technology, their education, their outcomes. And what I most remember in our very first study was we were sifting through the data to find something bad because it was so good, and we were afraid people would not believe it. But the real issue was, there are issues in survey research from a standpoint of it's not a comparative study, it's retrospective, but we really had outcomes of these mostly severe and profoundly hearing impaired kids who went to school, graduated, and really were doing quite well. And that was the first published article in the literature, the Journal of American Academy of Audiology, of the first study.
Right. That was 1993?
I think so.
Right. So
Yes.
we've been doing this for 25 years. We this is our third one
Wow.
because what we want to see is there consistency. I mean, the first study was done. There were no cochlear implants. I mean, it was just the beginning, but none of the people who took the survey, because these were graduates of the program, we wanted to see at the end of the line, how does this turn out? I mean, you can look one way at age 3 and 5, but how does it look when you're 18 and 20 and 30? And this was, again, 25 years ago. So we didn't have a computer-based method. We had paper and pencil.
Yes.
That we had to send these surveys through the mail to therapists. So, but as Dawn said, there were no real outcomes. I mean, the ultimate proof of something is how does it actually turn out, you know? And if the goal of auditory-verbal is children will grow up in listening and spoken language, mainstream environments with opportunities to be completely inculcated into the general community, well, did it? And that's what we wanted to know.
Yeah.
And I think a component that I always reflect on, because I continue to teach at the College of Worcester, is you have to put in perspective 95% or more of parents who learn at a very young age that their child is hearing impaired, they themselves are both hearing. Of course, there are individuals who are deaf who have deaf kids, but essentially these kids are raised in a family of all hearing. Hearing impairment, this invisible disability, it's completely unknown.
Right.
And I think we do need to be still cautious that society hears deaf and assumes one particular mode of communication, which is not listening in spoken language. And one of our themes, and it's been reinforced now for 3 different studies, is the outcomes are greatness. This little one is now grown up to be, as I said, when she graduated from Worcester, she needed a break before the AUD. She was awarded a Fulbright scholarship before she even had her Doctor of Audiology. And then she has a PhD and is an author on this paper that we're so excited about, as well as chapters. And this gives both of us incredible pride and joy of how this all has come out for many children. But this is just one superb example.
And it's certainly a terrific message for parents today who have or might be receiving that initial diagnosis that their baby is deaf. So tell us about you first did the study in 93. You
10 years.
Repeated it in what
I think
year?
about 10 years later was the time
2001,
frame.
2002.
And now you just repeated it again. So
Right.
let's talk about today's study. And what were some of your key findings that you found in today's study? And then we'll compare it to what does that look like over time?
I think one of the main things we found is technology change, like Dan said. I mean, there are so many factors like technology change, the ease of hearing loss identification, it changed a lot because of early, newborn hearing screening. That really has, I think, been a huge, huge game changer for all of these. But there are all of these trends that we found really great, like the educational outcome for these kids are phenomenal. They're all of them, all our participants graduated from high school. They all have different levels of continuing education, and they were all employed at very diverse types of jobs. I think that's how, like from everything from the medical profession to education to maybe being a business owner, working in a place where they really enjoy working. And I think that's a really important thing to acknowledge because we want to make sure that people know that there are many different kinds of opportunities for their kids when they grow up. And they can do the kinds of things they want to do in their life. And the other thing I thought was really interesting about this study was the previous 2 studies were Canadian and American participants. But we have participants from all over the world, mostly well, in Canada, but we had Australia and New Zealand, Germany, Philippines, and other countries, just to name a few.
Right.
And that trend of high educational levels and having kind of professional and personal flexibility that permeated around the world globally.
Absolutely.
It did.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to keep in mind this kind of moving target of universal newborn hearing screenings. There's a global movement for that, but certainly different U.S. states have different number of years it's been implemented. But when we think back to our first individuals, those individuals had fairly poor fidelity of amplification, and then there's been growth in that. But even this group of our participants range from 18 to someone I think in their 60s or 70s. So it's a pretty long span, mostly young adults. But those young adults are really the first individuals who even benefited from universal newborn hearing screenings and getting the technology. And whereas Stacey has what we call bimodal, a hearing aid and a cochlear implant, it's now becoming much more common for our little ones today to either have two or have one and quickly thereafter get a second. Can you imagine what the outcomes for these families in our world where we're testing them, getting them started, and teaching the families? Because, I mean, I think to Stacey's parents, they were just model individuals making a difference. But now we just have these babies whose outcomes will be even more phenomenal because of all the things that have changed. And now that's going to be our new outcomes to 1-year-olds who grow up.
Absolutely, because as you know, you guys have continued to beat that drum that hearing loss is about the brain and it's accessing that brain early.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. So in terms of what other key findings or impressions about this study that stands out to you, anything else other points that you think we need to discuss?
Well, what we noticed is there really was a continuity across all three studies. So we didn't find a difference in terms of educational outcomes being mainstreamed, opportunities in multiple professions. We saw that across all studies. The biggest difference was age of identification earlier, use of technologies, more cochlear implants, and earlier cochlear implants, but even quite a few individuals in this latest study got their implants later, like Stacey, although maybe there were 6, 7, or 8, some in their teens. So many, even in the current study, did start out with years of hearing aid use before they got their implants. So we're looking forward to the next study in maybe 10 years or so to find a group who started right from the beginning, right from the start, with implants, because that isn't what we have in this study, but we still have the same outcomes.
Yeah.
And I was struck with, not only because it was a global study with many countries involved, but many of these individuals, they had learned a home language, the language of the family, their home language, but many had learned second, and in some cases, I think there was someone with 4 or 5 foreign languages that they were speaking, and we're talking primarily severe and profoundly, mostly profoundly deaf individuals. It wasn't just because we had someone from Italy speaking Italian, it was Italian and something. And in many cases, I was really impressed with the multilingual nature of these kids when we think, will they even learn English?
Right, and I think that's kind of, it's a global world today, isn't it? And the importance of a child or an individual being able to speak 2 spoken languages, it's huge, isn't it, in terms of what we know about that and what the opportunities lie with that. Absolutely. So that's an interesting thing that you see more participants in this particular study knowing more spoken languages.
Right. And because we know that probably at least a fourth of U.S. families speak a language other than English at home. And in other parts of the world, that's a much higher percentage. And it's often the norm in countries where everyone has to know at least 2 languages or 3 languages in Europe. So we have to make sure that that opportunity is available to our children. And that means we have to get information to that brain, because hearing occurs in the brain. The hearing loss is this doorway problem. How do you breach the doorway and get that information to the brain? And as good as our current technologies are, they're not perfect. So having the family involved, and that's what we found, we continue to find out, because we ask questions on this survey about family involvement, because that family is the one that has the most time with the child, and children learn language best in meaningful conversations with people who love them. So auditory verbal is a family-focused, family-engaged intervention philosophy. And we asked, one of the questions is, did your family, your mother or father, did the family dynamic or the work history, did that change as a result of your hearing loss? And what was it, something like 60% said yes, that there were modifications that the family made. And your mother decided, she stayed at home, right?
Yeah, he stayed at home for 3 years with me. She used to work started a job before, but then she changed that and he stayed at home with me to make sure that I would be able to have language exposure. I guess really good way to say it.
Enrichment, enrich the language exposure. Because what we have to do is be thoughtful about it, you know. It's not enough to be in casual conversations. There need to be intentional. And I know your parents read to you. We talked a lot about reading aloud to you. And to
a lot of reading, a lot of science experiments with my dad.
You know, and I think what's interesting is that while your parents or your mom had the luxury that she was able to modify her work schedule, not every family can do that. And so that's where partnership with professionals come in, that listening and spoken language specialists can work with that child care center, can work with the primary caregivers of that child during the day as well as at the home. And it still is possible to have a listening and spoken language outcome even in that kind of situation.
There is, especially now with better remote microphone technologies. It really is, technology is critical to get to that brain when you have this doorway problem. So in addition to the implants, we do have much better remote microphones. We have mic accessories that can come with hearing aids and implants, and then we have separate systems, FM systems, digital systems that are absolutely critical, especially when you're in environments that aren't quiet and face-to-face and one-on-one. As you say, we have to work in the world where the child is.
And your comment about just part of the mission of Hearing First and other organizations such as that, part of it is we have some real issues, and I'm so glad we're here at ASHA, that there will be speech-language pathologists and audiologists coming to short courses. We hope we have a really big crowd now on Saturday for our talk. But part has to do with there's so many misconceptions about hearing impairment, and although I'm an incredible supporter of remote microphone, I have professional colleagues and individuals who wouldn't even think about using that technology. And the whole point is the best signal has to be delivered to these kids. And I think when our families are really understanding audiology, sometimes almost as better, as good as some of their clinicians they're working with, part of it is, it just is this natural raising of a child. You have a cool little brother who probably gave you a run for the money at times, but he grew up going, I don't care that she has a hearing loss, she's my sister. Everything has a normalcy to it. At the same time, in the study, we did ask about what were some of the individuals, the graduates' reflections, and the qualitative responses were really heartfelt, meaningful of, I know how hard my mom or my dad or my whole family was in raising me as a kid first. Oh yes, Stacey happened to have been profoundly deaf. It wasn't how we define Stacey.
Right, because hearing loss doesn't have to define the person. They're always a child first who happens to have a hearing loss. And that's where that partnership with professionals to guide and coach families to have that type of mindset and approach to raising their child. You know, I think it's also, didn't you ask in your study how it all turned out in terms of, would they as individuals choose this for themselves? And can you talk a little bit about that?
And across all three studies,
all
we
three
learned.
Studies.
And the majority of the people said, they were absolutely the right choice for them. And they were very happy with it. They knew that maybe there were challenges they faced, maybe technology challenges. And one point I do want to bring up, because it's a little personal for me, is they need to also have connection with other kids or other families of kids who are like them, who also have hearing loss or maybe also use spoken language. Because I think that there's a bond, a very unique bonding experience. And I think even though the kids are growing up in the mainstream, that relationship is also really important as well. And a couple of people pointed that out. But I think overall they were really happy with the way, or the choices that their parents made for them, even though they knew there were challenges along the way.
And it's not just a trend. We're talking in the high 90% of saying this was the choice.
Wow.
And that was consistent across all three. There were nuances of the impact of learning and growing up listening and spoken language. But I think you raised a really important point. As you grow up in a typical society, at the same time, there oftentimes are individuals who say, I know I'm the only one in the family, the only one in this school. And I think that's important for professionals to be very cognizant of the counseling dimension.
Right. And that's why it's important for families to connect with other families.
Right.
Because they get to meet other children, and children get to meet other children along the way as well. And that's critical. Yeah. Anything else that you found or trends across the 25 years?
Well, what did we find? What are we missing? Because we kind of hit the high points about education, mainstream from the beginning. They all went, didn't they all go to typical universities?
Typically, I remember we specifically asked in previous studies where they went, but it was definitely from early on, primarily there in the mainstream. But one thing that I think continues to be sort of, for us to be very aware of, is oftentimes the accommodations, the things that happened at the elementary and middle school and high school on up to college, and I've seen that in some other studies that have been done, that oftentimes it's just a matter of preferential seating and maybe a good view of the teacher, and we have to be thinking of the technology burst of value of having better accommodations early on. And that is something that we really have to take on as a mission for access. We're talking about auditory access for the brain, and we don't always have it.
And I think that when you talk about a child who in a family who's chosen listening and spoken language as an outcome, that becomes very critical. That is just as important, the technology to have access to the information around them, as it is, I'm going to compare it what a ASL interpreter would be for a child who is using ASL to communicate. So we have to have that technology piece and have that access, and I think that is often a very overlooked variable or important support that has to be addressed. And aggressive audiological management. I'm sitting here with 3 leading audiologists, and so I think I meet parents that a baby is seen, maybe fit at 12 months of age, and they're told to come back in a year.
Not acceptable.
And so what would you recommend to parents to be able to, when you say modifications and having access to information?
Well, I think part of it is we need excellence in audiology, excellence in the diagnostic, better pediatric audiology training, but it also is to be really aware of the technology and how to modify and monitor. And you don't do that in a 12-month period. So I think we are slowly changing the model, and hopefully that is happening in more and more universities.
Right.
Maybe in the context of a follow-up from our conversation, even some links such as an audiology protocol that is available from the A.G. Bell Association.
Yes.
The idea that Carol and I have been very involved in redoing an assessment, a tool that allows for people to have access to take an exam to demonstrate a voluntary certification of listening and spoken language specialists, that it really is something that we have high standards, and there are many very dedicated clinicians who want that for the outcomes that we've been able to achieve.
And, you bring that up, that it's pediatric audiology and following protocols, but one of the things that can be helpful for parents is to seek or ask if a professional has some specialty certification. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, of how that can be a lighthouse for what that tells parents if they have a person that holds the listening and spoken language specialist certification?
Yes. So the listening and spoken language specialist certification, we we call it LSL, is for listening and spoken language, is available through the A.G. Bell Academy for Listening and Spoken Language. And what the LSLS is a postgraduate voluntary certification that is obtained by getting at least 80 hours postgraduate of specific coursework and having 3 to 5 years of mentorship, of supervision. See, what that does is someone who has a speech pathology degree, audiology, or deaf education as a foundation, it gives them extra expertise in this area. So the professional, by obtaining the LSLS, has self-declared that they have taken on the responsibility of having expertise in teaching listening and spoken language through a family-centered approach, and also within an educational situation. So it's very important. It's very helpful for parents to look for a professional who has that certification, because then they know this person has absolutely taken on that extra responsibility.
Right. And although we're very happy the number grows, as we approach 1,000, we're not just talking about the U.S. and Australia and Canada. It is many individuals across the world, but we need to really think even larger impact.
Absolutely.
And I think sometimes we might not always have this gold standard of this voluntary certification. At the same time, I am very happy if tomorrow afternoon someone comes to a short course and they walk away with just some message of, that's a child, regardless of the degree of hearing loss, because of technology, has the potential to go home and with a family develop listening and spoken language. So even if we don't reach all individuals who go for that kind of commitment, there are more people who just walk away with insight as a professional. For parents, sometimes our parents are asking for that very high standard, but we just need to spread the news that this is something achievable.
Yeah, and I think that's why, at Hearing First, we provide mentoring towards that journey towards certification. And then we provide all kinds of educational opportunities because, like you say, not everyone might be in position to become a certified listening and spoken language specialist. But we all continue to learn, we all continue to grow, and people can learn and grow in terms of supporting families to achieve the outcomes that they're desiring in listening and spoken language. Yeah, it's such an exciting time, isn't it? I mean, it's amazing. Yes. So in terms of, let's move on to the next question here that's coming in. And so, you mentioned that there were some things with an online survey that there are pluses and minuses in terms of that. There may be some limitations with the study. Can you talk about the advantages and disadvantages of an online survey, the study that you conducted?
Yeah. I think some of the advantages of an online survey is that it had a much wider reach, that we're able to capture data from other countries. And we had a lot of people responding. But I think some of the disadvantages are that it's a very self-selected sample. There are people who want to take the survey are the ones who take it. And there may be people that have disappeared and don't know where they are or how to reach them. So that's one of the disadvantages, I think, of the survey.
Right. And at the same time, in the context of our approach to get individuals to participate, we were able to access these LSLs throughout the world to ask them to circulate it to their kids and graduates. They had to be 18 and above, partly because of issues of minors being in a study. And there were inclusion questions that we had individuals that we were able to maybe get a response, but realize they really were not in a truly listening spoken language. So although we had hundreds of respondents, our ultimate data set in the analysis was over 300.
Over 300.
Which is very impressive. But at the same time, with social media, there are websites of individuals who themselves are hearing impaired, that social media is going to be part of the future of survey research, that it will just be spread out and linked to others. So I really think, in a way, that we may not have captured them all by any means, because 300 does not represent the number, but I think we had access and promoting and recruiting truly across the world.
Yeah.
See, what happens when children grow up listening in spoken language, they're just out there living their lives. There isn't, there's certainly people have friends and across all different communities, but there isn't like a place where everyone gathers. So people are just out there in the world without really any particular connection to any mothership. And so it isn't like we can just delve into this ready population. And we had to kind of search them out and try and find them. And we, really through listservs and all. And then we needed to kind of weed out those that really weren't listening in spoken language. It was really an interesting process. But there, as you were saying, there's probably so many out there just living their lives just like everyone else.
They're pursuing their dreams. They're pursuing their careers and living life, and so it's like you say, there's not one place where they're all hanging out because they're dispersed and diverse and just like a general public doing what makes them happy and fulfilled and reaching their full potential.
That's one of the goals. Auditory-verbal practice.
Exactly.
To be in the mainstream, and that's what happened.
And that's what your study found, and it's been consistent for 25 years.
Yes.
As you've repeated it, right?
Yeah.
Wow, that's and that's so in terms of if a parent is out there listening, what do you think is the take-home message that you think they should hear from the study, from your outcome study?
Well, we're certainly happy it is about to be published in the AGBL publication called the Volturi View. So it'll be a late 2018. We haven't been given the exact timing, or early January or early 2019. So I think we do want to not just say, oh yeah, it all works out. There is evidence-based in a peer-reviewed journal. So I think that's important. So sets the foundation of rigor. But I think the most important message, and I do this because I might be a professor, but I still see kids because I couldn't possibly go through my week without seeing a little one. I think I really can't help but think every time I work with a family, because I'm working with the parents, and that little one comes and they're younger than they've ever been, and they're implanted younger or have great technology, and it doesn't always have to be implants. I just walk away going, yeah, I just work with kiddo. And it's like, oh yeah, he was profoundly deaf. I just have brought up in a world that these are incredible kids who have this difference, but I never look like, oh, I'm a wonderful person who works with little deaf kids. I work with kids, and they really truly are just kids with incredible supportive parents that can have the sky's the limit outcome. And boy, 25 years of surveys have really proved that to be the case. That is how I go to work and see a little one.
Yep. It's pretty amazing today, isn't it? Yeah.
And needless to say, with the weaving of our stories, you can't imagine just how proud Carol and I are to be on this couch with this young person who really, if you think about it, she probably didn't have the best body aids on her from a fidelity standpoint, much less to have her come to college and be just the wonderful individual who she is.
Right. And so it's, and with PhD, AUD in audiology, Fulbright Scholar, all of those things, you've pursued everything that you want to pursue and more, right? That there are no limits for you.
Right.
So.
No, I think having heard you say all that, I think is really important. That is something that kind of takes like a village with my parents, and then Carol, who was my audiologist for like a few decades. I think I graduated from my AUD program and retired in the same year.
Right, yes. She was my AUD student too.
Who was my professor at Worcester. And I think actually having that kind of support, I think, as a person hearing off or also for the family, I think that's a really key component as well. So really a lot of people involved in that whole process.
And I think that's a terrific message for parents out there today, and that is you don't have to go it alone. That there's many professionals that stand ready to support you and guide you along that journey as you pursue the dream that you have for your baby to learn to listen and talk. And I think that's a terrific thing that you don't have to do it alone. There's many areas and places of support. Anything you'd like to add in terms of
And-
takeaways?
Right, and you know that if we do what it takes, and that goes back to the logic chain that we have,
Right.
also on the Hearing First website, that we know what it takes to get a listening and spoken language outcome. I mean, we know that we have to identify this doorway problem early. We've got to get the best technology to get to the brain. We have the parents involved to enrich this brain and develop it for listening, spoken language, leading to literacy, with the ultimate goal of choices and independence out there in the world. Just living a life is what you would like to do.
Yeah.
We know it can be done.
Yep.
We know what it takes, and we know how to proceed, and we have the outcomes.
And such a time as this, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you. You mentioned the study will be published in the Volturi View coming up towards the end of 2018, early 2019, to read it in full. Also, Saturday morning here in Boston at ASHA, you'll be presenting a talk on the study to go more in depth. So if you're here attending ASHA, this is a preview of what lies ahead, and you want to make sure you attend that session to dive deeper into the information. But I want to say thank you so much for being here and for discussing the outcomes and the work that you've done and sharing your life journey and how it all wove together. That's pretty amazing. And I'd also like to invite you, if you'd like to join the discussion and learn more about listening and spoken language, plug into our community. If you're a family, come join the Family to Family Support Community. You're going to meet other families just like you on that journey who can guide you, who can support you, and as you teach your child to listen and talk. And if you're a professional, come join our professional learning community. We have many learning experiences that thought leaders in the field are leading and teaching so that you can up-level your practice and improve outcomes for children and families. And if you'd like to stay up to date on the latest listening and spoken language information and resources, be sure and subscribe to the Hearing First newsletter, and we'll meet you in your mailbox, in your inbox. But thank you so much for being with us today, and we look forward to connecting with you further on our online spaces. So thank you.